Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Future Thinkers series, where we bring you the latest ideas and thinking from the world's best thinkers and best-selling authors. My name is Christine Guillemont, and I'm very pleased today to be talking to Salim Ismail, and he's going to be speaking about his book, Exponential Organizations. You're very welcome to ask questions of Salim about halfway or towards the end of the interview. So, who is Salim Ismail? Well, he is the co-founder of a company acquired by Google. He's a Canadian angel investor, a speaker, advisor, entrepreneur and strategist, and he's one of the founding executive directors and the current global ambassador of Singularity University. Could you please make Salim Ismail welcome. Salim, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, and thank you for joining our Future Thinkers members today. Salim, the world is changing so fast that most businesses would be very nervous and feel threatened by that future. Could you reassure us that there is something we can do about future-proofing our businesses?
Yes, actually there is. We're kind of entering a new phase. The playbook for building companies has changed every few years, and we've just hit one of those inflection points recently.
Okay, well, I'm just interested to find out what is an exponential organization.
Sure. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we started noticing there was a new breed of organization that had learned how to scale very quickly. We've learned how to scale technology pretty well. We can go from 1 user to 1 million users with very little difficulty. But scaling the actual business and organization structure has always been painfully incremental and painfully linear. But just in about 4, 5, 6 years ago, we started seeing a new breed of organization that can actually scale that fast. So we noticed it as a weak signal. We watched it for a little bit. Then we did about a year of research to see whether this phenomenon was real. We today have about 100 companies that are scaling it this fast. The benchmark that we found is that these new organizations are scaling at a minimum 10x performance improvement compared to their peers in the same space, which is, not minor. And so the question we've been looking at is, what are these things? What are the characteristics? And how do you build one?
Okay, so an exponential organization makes exponential leaps and builds at 10 times competitor organizations.
Yeah, minimum, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay, so one of the things that you see might be common to exponential organizations is something called a massive transformative purpose, or MTP. Can you explain what the MTP is?
Sure. So, if you think about Google, they have this tagline, organize the world's information, right? And it's creates a gravity well of interest, a community forms around it. It's great to hire and retain talent. And so most corporations have this classical tagline, which most of the employees have no idea what it is. Whereas if you have this kind of memorable, almost like an advertising tagline that's aspirational and purposeful, it allows the community and the externalities of the organization to map onto it and understand what it's about. So Quirky, which does consumer packaged goods, and it has 1 million inventors submitting ideas to it, their MTP is make invention accessible. Right? At Singularity University, ours is positively impact 1 billion people by leveraging accelerating technologies. And so we're seeing every single exponential organization we found has one, either at a global level or at an individual kind of industry level, like Dollar Shave Club. They want to do shaving for about $1 a month, that kind of thing.
Okay, so it's different to something like a mission statement, and you say that it actually is more powerful than a normal mission statement.
Yes, and it's an aspirational, when Google says organize the world's information, they don't quite talk about how they're going to do it. It's a very kind of future-focused, outward-looking statement. Coca-Cola, funnily enough, has just taken one on. Coca-Cola's new tagline is open happiness, right? Their classic mission statement would be more like sell sugar water through superior distribution chains and an ecosystem vendor network to add value to our blah, blah, blah. And most people would have no idea inside Coca-Cola what that meant or what that was about. Whereas if you say open happiness, kind of people kind of can latch onto it, understand it, it's memorable. And so we're finding actually brands morph into this phenomenon.
So in your book, Exponential Organizations, you really do latch on to the importance of this MTP. In fact, so much so that you think when others understand the importance of having a massive transformative purpose statement, that there will be something of a land grab for these little statements.
Well, you know, yeah, exactly right. If you think about Google and they say we want to organize the world's information, if somebody else comes along and says we want to do it better, they're always going to be a bit behind, and so that we think there'll be kind of there's probably a certain number of these available. I may be wrong, but I think there'll be kind of people will grab onto these things. We're about using accelerating technologies, and it's hard for another entrant to do that better. TED, for example, is spreading ideas, and it's hard for other people to come along in the same way and do the same thing.
Do you think that one of these MTPs, well, these MTPs have a sort of a whiff of the social enterprise about them? So it almost feels as if instead of being a business per se, they're sort of there's some sort of a beautiful social enterprise that we can all latch onto.
Oh, very, very much so. If I use Coca-Cola again as my example here, open happiness allows them to tilt the company from, an extractionary mechanism for society to actually delivering value, really delivering value. The head of Coca-Cola in the Philippines was able to follow this kind of new paradigm and take the entire ad budget for the year and divert it towards disaster relief. Because if you kind of really believe that was where you want to go, which was a phenomenal thing to do. And so we think these new organizations take on and have built into them a social purpose in this way.
Well, you've got lots of case studies and lots of examples of how different organisations become exponential organisations, and some things they have in common. One of them is a different decision-making process. And in the book you say that traditional companies will often make big business decisions based on some sort of intuition from the leaders, and exponential organisations work in a very different way to that.
Yeah, so if you think about traditional, if you're the senior manager in any company, you have a deep, experienced, rich set of interactions with your industry. You're the senior manager at some division of a mining equipment maker, and you know how mining equipment is made because you've been doing it for 25 years, managing teams around it for 25 years, and you base your decisions based on that paradigm. What we're finding is in a new environment where things are so much more data-driven, that heuristic no longer applies, right? If I'm hiring somebody with 25 years of marketing experience today, not only do they not know how the new paradigm works, like this type of interaction, they're actually a liability because they're going to be bringing old patterns to what's really a totally changed environment, right? And so in order to kind of obviate that or minimize the effect of that, we're seeing these new organizations operate in a much more autonomous way where people pretty much choose what they want to do more and more.
And that allows them to think of the organisation, perhaps using your mining equipment example, not so much as a mining equipment company, but perhaps a company that facilitates extraction of minerals, and that might not be mining equipment, it might be something completely different.
Yes, exactly right. And we're seeing quite a few examples of that type of a phenomena take place. I'll give you an example of how we've seen this work. We actually worked with Jeremy Howard, a Kiwi, apologies for that, and he is one of the world's leading data scientists. And he spent a day in a large mobile phone company, one of the biggest in the US, running machine learning algorithms against creditworthiness. Now, if you're the head of credit management or customer management, the creditworthiness of your mobile phone customers is an important driver of profitability. And you're operating on a particular set of, okay, where do they live? What's their income level? Some set of heuristics to see how creditworthy they are. When he can run 10,000 multivariant analyses of all of that data in the company, he found he was able to increase and create a direct savings of $1 billion a year just by running a day's worth of machine learning algorithms, because that will figure out patterns that you will never see in the human brain. Right? Unfortunately, he didn't work off a percentage basis on that particular engagement. But essentially, we're seeing this phenomenal new capability driven by data allow us to operate organizations and to make decisions in a very different way.
And of course, the data is in the hands of people who could be anywhere in the world. And I guess a lot of the big cities that have built up with organisations with headquarters in big cities, that may no longer be relevant to starting up an organisation that could leap, as you say, 10 times faster and grow 10 times faster than their competitors. It could be that someone with a mobile phone in a developing country, for example, could make an exponential organisation global.
Oh, very much so. And we think we'll see a growing phenomenon of that. That's just beginning. For the moment, it's mostly Silicon Valley based, with some sprinkling in the rest of the US and some in Europe. But there's absolutely no reason why we won't see these globally. The Chinese phone company Xiaomi is a great example. They use a very rich mixture of some of the attributes of exponential organizations, and they've exploded to billions of dollars of sales in less than 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. You are, talking about Silicon Valley, and in the book you do make the point that software is largely the area where exponential organisations are growing, but certainly you are making a point that traditional organisations can also run in this exponential way. Have you got examples of that?
Yes, very much so. What we find is, in a traditional organization, taking on this massive new kind of paradigm shift is actually not that easy. Most of these big business transformation projects fail. They cost a lot. They're terribly political, and they take a very long time. What we found is when you try and do, for a couple of years before Singularity, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, and I ran their incubator called Brickhouse. And I found that when you try and do disruptive innovation in any existing organization, that the immune system of the company will come and attack you. All of our organizations are built to withstand change and withstand risk, and now we're finding that is the harder bit. So dealing with that difficulty is probably the most important structural aspect of our recommendations, is how do you negate that? And a key way of doing that is to not try and mess too much with the core organization. And also, if you try one of these big business transformation projects, you risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so our suggestion, our strong recommendation is leave the existing business as is and incrementally improve it, but take your disruptive change agents to the edge of the organization and do something there. Everybody in their organizations has these very bright, very loyal, super smart, very hard to manage people that have great ideas. They don't fit neatly inside the organization. If you take them to the edge and say, go do something interesting there, that turns out to work really well. And the master of doing this is actually Apple. Apple has a great design capability, and yes, they have a great technology supply chain, but their real innovation is an organizational one. What they do, unlike any other business in the world that we've seen, is they take a small disruptive team to the edge of the organization, they keep them totally stealth, and they say, go attack a different industry. So they started with music, and then phones, and then tablets, and now watches, payments, healthcare, cars. There's no limit to their market cap. They can just keep knocking over industries in this way. And we're fascinated by that. Nobody's noticed that this is what they're doing. We think in a world where either you're the disruptor or you're the disrupted, big companies will have to react.
I know that I don't quite know where this fits in with that, but I guess you were saying that in some ways it operates a bit like a beehive, and perhaps these are the bees that go out and find new areas of pollen, and those are the ones that you want to encourage on the outskirts, but you still have to keep the core group of worker bees in the center.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can, well, also by decentralizing, I mean, you're talking about the autonomy aspect there. It allows your people to go find and sniff out new opportunities that you'll not find from a top-down perspective, right? Most of our strategic decision-making comes from long decision cycles where reports filter up through the organization, have no recognition to reality when they reach the boardroom, the boardroom then issues some sort of diktat saying this is what we should do, and it takes a long time to filter back down. By the time it gets down there, it's unrecognizable. I have this fascinating story from about 20 years ago. IBM interviewed the top 100 CIOs in the world and asked them, do you use open source software in your stack? And 95% said no. When they went to talk to the sysadmins who were actually running the servers, etc., and asked them, do you use open source software, and 95% said yes. Right? So there's an example of the desperate mismatch between senior management and the coalface in any organization. And IBM made a strategic bet there and said, okay, let's head heavily into open source software because we can see at the grassroots everybody's using it.
Okay, and it must be fascinating work for you to look into these exponential organizations because they would be changing as fast as you can try and record what they're doing. What are some of the most, what do you think is the most fascinating thing about an exponential organization versus a traditional linear organization?
I think it's just that, so maybe the most important aspect is the sheer economic basis on which these new organizations are operating. So there are kind of 10 characteristics of these exponential organizations, 5 externalities like TED leveraging community or Google leveraging algorithms, Airbnb leveraging other people's assets, and so on, and 5 internal mechanisms like autonomy that we talked about or social technologies to allow horizontal communication to occur in the organization and trap it effectively. And so we found that if you implement 4 out of the 10, you get this 10x performance improvement. Right? Not everybody does everything, but if you implement 4 out of the 10, you get these. The sheer pace of it is quite staggering. So you could take Uber, right? At the moment, Uber has just crossed 50% of all business ground transportation in the U.S. 50% of the revenues is just tipped over for Uber. And the core economic thesis that has emerged for these new organizations goes roughly as follows. When you're running a business, you worry about managing cost of supply and cost of demand, and we try and optimize around both sides of that equation as fiercely as we can. What the internet did for us for the first time ever, it allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Right? Online marketing, referral marketing. If you get a viral loop, your acquisition costs go completely to zero. And that was the first time we were able to do that in business. What these new exponential organizations have figured out is, how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? Right? So for Uber, the marginal cost of adding another car to its fleet is almost zero. Same with Airbnb, can add another room to its inventory for almost zero. Whereas if you're Hyatt, you have to build a whole new hotel. Right? Now, you can drop the cost of supply exponentially. It takes out the denominator and your market cap explodes. And that's why we're seeing such extraordinary valuations of these companies that don't seem to fit reality, but actually the economic thesis is very clear.
Yeah, and I suppose if you look at something like an Airbnb and Uber, who you do say in your book are some of the best at being an exponential organization and growing at this rapid pace, they themselves probably in a year or two will be a completely different organization because they will be doing something that will be ahead of the pack as far as you know.
Yeah, so an interesting point becomes what happens when an EXO becomes big, right?
Yeah.
And what we found is a couple of things. One is that they all, if they're successful, end up becoming a platform. So Yahoo, BlackBerry, Nokia failed to become a platform. They reached huge size, scaling with software and other mechanisms. They failed to become a platform and they died. Apple, Facebook, Google have successfully become platforms, and now they're doing very, very well. They then spawn other exponential organizations off them. Zynga, for example, got spun off and layered on top of Facebook and grew very, very fast. Zynga, by the way, is maybe the fastest growing company in the history of the world. They went from 0 to 250 million users in something like 18 months. Just absolutely unheard of. And so we find that they become platforms and they go from there. So Uber, now that it has a strong distribution network and a fleet of cars, is looking at autonomous cars, deliveries, all sorts of other things that deal with logistics on the ground.
Okay, well, here at Future Thinkers, We are very keen on trying to find ways that we can implement ideas in our own businesses. And what I'm interested to find out is, when we wake up tomorrow morning, what are a couple of things that we could do to take action in our own businesses, which may be linear, may be traditional? What are a couple of things we can do? Or perhaps we're just starting out and we haven't got a business really up and running yet. What can we do to begin the path of becoming an exponential organization?
Sure. So a couple of easy first steps. First is pick an MTP, right? So
right.
Yeah. So yours might be connecting great minds with everyone, right? Something like that. And you pick that, and now you have some aspirational tagline that everybody can rally around and figure out ways of doing it that frees you up from thinking about which technology, which medium, which format might work the best, and gives you that freedom of really exploring and really delivering value to substantive level. The next would be to think about how can you information enable your industry. We're finding a huge amount of value today in either taking and harnessing different information streams together or turning an existing domain into information. Right? I'll give you a very dramatic example of that one. Peter Diamandis, one of my colleagues at Singularity University, and really the main driver of the organization, has been running for the last few years a tricorder X Prize, literally the Star Trek tricorder, like that Spock used to use, or Scotty or whatever, Bones or whoever. And somebody will win $10 million when a handheld device can outperform 10 board-certified doctors using information, leveraging artificial intelligence to do diagnoses. 300 teams have been competing for this. We are down to the final 8. The winner will be likely announced by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, driven by information, we will have a handheld device that will outperform most doctors. Right? Now this will have a profound effect in the bush in Australia, where you have a doctor per million square kilometers type of thing, or in emerging countries. Hypochondriacs will have a field day with this gadget. They'll be buying 2 of them to make sure they're not really sick, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see how massive of an impact that would have, how disruptive that is to the status quo, right? And so taking a domain and information enabling it is the second key aspect, or leveraging new information streams that others haven't spotted. The third is then to build your organization with as few people and as few assets as possible. So you try and use assets on demand, staff on demand, et cetera, in the same way that Uber does not employ its own drivers, Airbnb does not own its own hotel rooms, et cetera. And that gives you lots of flexibility and allows you to scale. The big inflection point, there was a quote by David Rose, one of our faculty, that really hit it home for me. He was speaking at one of our events, and he said, any business that was built for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st.
Wow.
Right? Because all of our organizations are built for predictability, efficiency, and globalization. Whereas today, adaptability is the higher order bit. With the world changing so fast, your organization cannot be built for efficiency and doing the same thing again and again. It has to be built for flexibility, adaptability, and speed. And therefore, we think the category of large companies may be at risk as a sector.
I mean, it sounds really, after reading your book, Exponential Organizations, that every sector is at risk. And you actually say in the book, just be aware that someone is working to disrupt your business now as you're reading this. So
yeah, as a fun game, we take executives in our programs at Singularity University, and we say, give us an industry, and we'll give you 6 ways we could disrupt it. More importantly, in every industry today, there's a few dozen very disruptive startups operating right now. And so a second recommendation for companies is find those disruptive startups in your industry and then partner with them, learn from them, steal from them, acquire them, invest in them, whatever, but figure out how to juxtapose with that new reality. Something unique has happened also with the rise of technology in the last few years, which is that major innovation used to come from big companies or big government labs. And today it doesn't come from there. It comes from entrepreneurs doing very radical new things because the costs of technology have dropped so much that an Elon Musk can take on 3 major industries with impunity, having no experience in any of them, and create market leaders in all of them. And we've just never been able to do that before in the history of the world.
I know, yeah, I know that you were saying that in your book too, that, you know, people can jump so much more quickly when they're nimble. We are taking questions now. If anyone would like a question for Salim, we don't have much time because it's so interesting. There's so much to talk about, and I have gone slightly over time. But I do have a question here, Salim, and someone's brought up a very good point. Do exponential organisations work if the workforce is older, or do they need largely young employees?
It comes down to a mindset. You know, I'm frankly not a spring chicken anymore. Certainly with my travel schedule, I don't feel like one. But it really comes down to your mindset. And there's plenty of examples of folks that are older but are very flexible and nimble in the way that they operate, and they can do things. The younger folks, and especially there's been a chasm in the millennials, where they are operating in a completely different way. They don't like these old top-down structures being told what to do. They fit much more naturally into this. And when you can let that free, it really empowers the organization quite profoundly. So age is not really a hard barrier, but it's very much a soft barrier in terms of mentality.
Okay, and just a final question. We always hear about the successes, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. Do thousands of these exponential organisations burn bright but then crash and burn because they have to keep taking risks?
Yes, they do. I look at BlackBerry as an example, or Nokia. Nobody could have dreamt 10 years ago that you would unlaunch Nokia. And the speed of it was just absolutely staggering, right? And we're seeing markets change very dramatically. I was talking to the head of strategy of one of the biggest mobile phone companies in the world, and they're predicting an 85% drop in revenues in the next 5 years in their organization. So there is a bloodbath out there, and existing industries, as new as they are, the mobile phone world, are seeing absolutely devastating threats as a consequence of this. Sitting still is not optional. One example, somebody often says to me, well, you're not going to disrupt the oil and gas business or mining. And actually, we see massive disruption happening in oil and gas because of solar energy. Solar is doubling every 22 to 30 months in its price performance today. And at this pace, we will have 100% of world energy supply deliverable by solar in about 25 years, which will have kind of big impacts on large oil companies and all sorts of geopolitical consequences for the Middle East, and for, you know, the U.S. will have to find other reasons to go to war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, well, on that note, I think we'll have to wrap it up. Just before we do go, though, Salim, we do like to ask whether or not there is a book that you found very inspiring that you read, or perhaps just some words of wisdom about your time exploring issues that you've come across.
Yeah, a concept that we kind of found at Singularity, and Peter Diamandis, our co-founder and chairman, wrote this book, Abundance. And he argues that pretty much we're getting, if we can harness technology effectively, we could soon have an abundance of healthcare, education, energy, clean water in about a decade. And what would the world look like if that was the case? And the kind of that's been filtering and bubbling through as I've been writing the book, all of our businesses were built around scarcity. You get an asset or a workforce, put a legal boundary around it, and then try and sell access to scarcity. But these new organizations are figuring out how to tap into an abundance. If you own a car, it sits empty 96% of the time or something, and Uber is tapping into that oversupply. Airbnb is tapping into other people's bedrooms, that there is an overabundance of those, rather than having to build a hotel. So there's the heuristic that we would think about is, how do you tap into abundance, create business models around that, rather than trying to constantly find or leverage scarcity.
Okay, so that collaborative consumerism. Well, we are going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you coming on to the program today, Salim Ismail, and talking about your book, Exponential Organizations. Thank you so much for joining our Future Thinkers members today.
It's been great to be here.